Chapter 1. Darkness over Egypt. Egypt breathed with power, but it was a predatory breath. Its palaces gleamed with gold, mined from the depths of the desert, and its walls, covered in flawless hieroglyphs, extolled the eternity and divine supremacy of the pharaoh. The fields, stretching from horizon to horizon, yielded bountiful harvests, for the god of the Nile himself, Hapi, annually renewed the land, bringing life-giving silt. Yet, beneath this blinding splendor, beneath the music of the temple ceremonies and the scent of lotuses, lurked a shadow, the groan of an enslaved people. The Israelites, once accepted as guests by the great Joseph, had become slaves, transformed into living clay in the hands of the Egyptian machine of grandeur. Their bondage was not merely hard labor, but a slow, methodical annihilation of the spirit. It was daily agony. Their hands, created for domestic farming and shepherding, turned to stone from the toil of building the treasure cities of Pithom and Rameses. Each dawn brought a new burden, a fresh dose of the overseer's shouts that cut through the morning mist. Backs bowed under the weight of hewn stone, and hearts cracked from the pain accumulated over 4 centuries. In the eyes of these people, the descendants of Abraham, there was neither hope nor fire, only submission and a deep, river-like realization that they were forgotten. Forgotten by Egypt, forgotten by time, and it seemed forgotten even by their own heaven. Pharaoh, the embodiment of a god on earth, Ramses, the mighty son of the sun, was afraid, and this was not a fear of swords or open revolt, for a slave cannot rebel against omnipotence. It was not swords that terrified him, but numbers. The people of Israel were multiplying like grain, pushing through stone, like a wild vine strangling a royal cedar. Under conditions of unbearable oppression, their fruitfulness seemed like magic, a daring challenge to the divine order of Egypt. Pharaoh saw in their growth not only a demographic threat, but a potential crack in his golden armor, a vulnerability that could ally itself with Egypt's enemies. And then, from the mouth of His Majesty, who possessed the power to create reality with a single word, came the decree that froze the blood in mother's veins and turned the Nile, the source of life, into a graveyard. The command was terrifying in its simplicity. Every newborn Hebrew male infant was to be thrown into the river. It was a brilliantly cruel move. To destroy future warriors, deny the people successors, and, most horrifyingly, force mothers to mourn those whom the Nile must accept as a sacrifice instead of granting them life. Sorrow enveloped the Israelite settlements, turning the joy of expectation into unbearable dread. When a son was born, the tent fell silent, a silence heavier than the stones of the pyramids. Every mother became the murderer of her own dreams, and every cradle an inevitable altar. In this darkness, when even prayers were caught in parched throats, it seemed that hope had died and the covenant of God had crumbled to dust. Chapter 2. The Child Among the Reeds. In this suffocating atmosphere of total fear that permeated the air, in one house of the tribe of Levi, amidst the muted cries and whispers of terror, an infant was born. The mother, Jochebed, a woman whose name meant Yahweh is her glory, looked upon her newborn son, and her heart, already bruised by grief for all the other mothers, trembled with an unprecedented intensity. He was not just a boy doomed to perish. There was something incomprehensible about him, something that transcended the very nature of slavery and death. A calmness in his gaze, though he had yet to see the world, and a light in his features, as if heaven itself had descended to earth and was reflected in his face. His beauty was not merely physical, it was divine, a sign that God not only knew of his people's suffering, but was acting in defiance of the Pharaoh's might. Jochebed could not, dared not surrender this miracle. It was a mother's war against an empire, a war of love against law. For 3 months she hid him. Each day was an exquisite, unbearable torture. She breathed each day as if it were her last, smothering his cries in moments of fear when Egyptian guards passed the tent. She learned his every breath, his slightest whimper, turning her sorrow into vigilance and her fear into a wall. The child's life became the most precious treasure, carried not beneath her heart, but in her arms, shielded by her own body from the entire world. But time, relentless like the Egyptian law, ran out. The child grew, strengthened, and his cries could no longer be suppressed. They risked betrayal. It was a cry full of strength and future wrath, a sound that could not be concealed. And then Jochebed grasped the terrible yet only possible truth. To save him was to let him go. Her love demanded renunciation. With tears that fell onto her aged, labor-worn hands, she wove a basket from the Nile reeds. It was not merely a container. It was an ark of salvation, a miniature replica of Noah's vessel, destined to pass through the deluge of the Pharaoh's decree. She meticulously, with the precision of a jeweler, lined it with bitumen and pitch to prevent water from seeping through. This was her last, greatest maternal gift, a defense crafted from faith, a hermetic despair. She placed her son inside this floating cradle, this coffin of hope, depositing within it not only his tiny body, but all her unfulfilled dreams, all the prophecies she saw in his clear eyes. She went to the river, accompanied by her elder daughter, Miriam. The Nile, which had claimed thousands of sons, now became the only path. Jochebed set the basket upon the waves, which were simultaneously her executioners and her saviors. In releasing him, she did not surrender him to the river's will, but committed him into the hands of God. It was an act of absolute, desperate faith. Her soul ascended to the heavens. Lord, you who saved Abraham from the sacrificial knife, you who preserved our lineage through famine, now you yourself become his father. May the river that serves Pharaoh now serve your providence. The waves caught the basket, and it slowly drifted, disappearing among the thick, treacherous reeds. Chapter 3. Destiny in the Waters. The basket floated. It was a tiny but fearless ship on the great, majestic, and perilous river. The waves of the Nile, carrying the silt, the blood, and the glory of Egypt, rocked it like a cradle among the thick, hidden reeds. Over the water hung that strange, solemn silence that precedes the fulfillment of destiny, as if time itself, controlled by the Pharaoh, held its breath, awaiting the intervention of a higher power. The sun pierced through the tall stalks, and sparkling droplets of water fell upon the basket, like the silver tears of Miriam, who watched her brother's journey from a distance. She stood there, like a young sentinel of the covenant, frozen between the reeds and the sky, and her child's heart beat in rhythm with every wave that carried her brother. And just as the basket reached the point appointed by Providence, the Pharaoh's daughter, Bithiah, came to the river. She came not merely to bathe, but to perform a ritual of purification that separated her from the stifling ethics of his palace. from the dust of its intrigues. She, the royal daughter, surrounded by attendants, suddenly felt her gaze, trained on luxury and permissiveness, drawn to something inconspicuous, hidden. She spotted the basket drifting in the shallows, the embodiment of a strange, dangerous secret. She ordered her servant to open it, and the world around her stopped. The heart of the princess, which should have been covered in royal coldness, warmed. She had expected to see, perhaps, a stillborn child or a wild fledgling, but instead saw a living, beautiful, divinely blessed infant. The child was frightened, perhaps sensing a foreign scent, the scent of royal authority, and began to cry. But this was no ordinary wail. In that cry was something primal, deep, something that touched even a heart raised in luxury, a heart that had never known need or pain. It was the cry of a cursed but chosen people. The Pharaoh's daughter instantly understood. This is one of the Hebrews' children. It was the realization that before her lay a transgression of her father's law, a challenge to his authority. She knew that behind this basket was the death and despair of a slave mother. But she also knew that by touching this infant, she was touching something greater than politics or law. She did not turn away. On the contrary, she took him into her arms as her own, and in that moment, her royal hand, accustomed to command, showed the highest mercy. It was the first great challenge to tyranny enacted in its very heart. At that moment, Miriam appeared, observing everything, and asked with a cunning worthy of a future prophet, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" The princess, blinded by emotion, did not sense the deception, but saw the solution to her problem. She agreed, and Miriam brought none other than Jochebed herself, the child's mother. Thus, through divine irony, Moses, condemned to death, not only received life in the very heart of his enemy's home, but was returned to his mother for nursing. His mother was paid to love her own child, and for a brief time, fear gave way to incredible, unimaginable joy. Moses' life was sealed by a miracle from his first moments. He was the child saved from the water, hence his name, Moshe, from the Egyptian word meaning born, or son, but interpreted in Hebrew as drawn out of the water. His destiny was forever linked to the Nile, but a Nile that became a symbol of rescue, not death. Chapter 4. Education in the Palace. Years passed, blending into a continuous stream of gold, marble, and power. Moses grew up not just in a palace, but in the heart of a world empire that considered itself the master of all ages and peoples. His childhood was steeped in luxury that bordered on magic, amidst the scent of lotuses and sandalwood, amidst the whispers of hundreds of slaves who carried out his slightest command. He was educated by the priests of Amun-Ra, who taught him the secrets of the celestial bodies and hieroglyphs, by warriors who prepared him to command armies, and by sages who opened to him knowledge of mathematics, philosophy, and statecraft. His mind was sharp as the blade of an Egyptian sword, and his education was the highest that the son of Pharaoh's daughter could receive. He was the heir to millennia of wisdom. Nevertheless, despite all this splendor, his heart remained restless. Deep within his soul, beneath the layers of gold and royal robes, pulsed an alien melody. Perhaps it was that primal foreign cry he heard in his hiding place among the reeds, or a memory sealed in his subconscious from his true mother, whom he could not forget. In every slave who bent his back under the lash, he saw something familiar, something that answered a secret call in his blood. His eyes, though trained on the splendor of palace frescoes and majestic columns, were drawn to simple, tormented people, to those who smelled not of lotus, but of clay and sweat. Light and shadow wrestled within him. On one side, he was a prince, the beloved of Pharaoh's daughter, who loved him as a son, offering him the golden key to power and eternal glory. On the other side, he was the son of a slave, a child of the covenant, carrying within him the unspoken pain of an entire people. He knew he did not belong to this brilliant yet empty world. He often wandered from the noise of palace feast to the quiet banks of the Nile, listening to its ceaseless flow. And in that monotonous sound, he heard a calling that was stronger than gold, power, and all the Egyptian deities. It was the voice of destiny, whispering of his true origin and the real purpose of his life. His maturity was marked by an internal rift. He was a skilled warrior and a wise politician, but his soul sought truth not in hieroglyphs, but in justice. This internal conflict reached its zenith when he, under the guise of his high position, began secretly visiting the Israelite quarters, the poor mud huts built by his people. There, he saw not only labor, but the boundless, humiliated dignity of his brothers. He saw how their faith was crumbling, how the light was fading in the eyes of the old and the young. With every such secret journey, the connection with the palace weakened, and the bond with the forgotten people strengthened. He was like a magnificent torch lit for the Egyptian gods, but its flame was slowly returning to its original Israelite fire. His destiny was determined not by marble, but by the clay from which he was formed. Chapter 5. Child of Two Worlds. He stood at the peak of his youth and power, but his soul was the epicenter of an earthquake. Moses stood between two worlds, between the throne and the shameful dust of the slave quarters, between absolute power and a quiet yet insurmountable conscience. His heart was a battlefield where two voices fought. One, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, promising him eternity and glory in the Valley of the Kings. The other, the son of the slave people, demanding only suffering and struggle from him. He was like a statue carved from two different stones that could never merge into one whole. Every night, when the Egyptian stars, as cold and distant as his adoptive family, rose over the Nile, he heard the river's sound. But it was no longer just the sound of water. It was the whisper of the reeds where his small ark once drifted. It was the voice of his mother, the voice of Jochebed, who sang him songs full of bitterness and hope, songs he remembered without realizing where they came from. It seemed to him then that God had not abandoned him, that the same invisible hand that guided his basket to the princess's bank was preparing him for a great, dangerous road. Moses understood. His upbringing in the palace was not an accident, but a strategy of providence. He was taught the art of empire so that he could destroy it from within. One day, when the sun stood high, like the eye of Ra, observing the world, the internal conflict erupted in an external, irreversible act. He went out to his slave brothers, consciously rejecting the title, luxury, and security. There, in the sand, amidst the hot dust and shouting, he saw an Egyptian overseer brutally beating his brother. In that moment, Moses saw not just an act of violence, but all the tyranny of Egypt concentrated in a single whiplash. It was the breaking point. His Egyptian composure shattered. The son of the palace, trained in the art of war, looked around and, seeing no one, committed a private execution. He killed the Egyptian and buried his body in the sand. This was the physical, yet symbolic slaying of his Egyptian identity. He had chosen. In that moment, Moses ceased to be a prince and became an exile, a criminal in the eyes of the empire, but a deliverer in the eyes of his people. His deed, which was meant to remain a secret, was exposed the next day by the Israelites themselves. Moses realized that his time in Egypt was over. His attempt to save his brothers by the strength of the flesh had failed. He fled the palace, the city, his past destiny. He ran into the desert, into the void, into a place where there was neither Nile nor Pharaoh, but only sky and silence. This was his second act of birth, the birth of the leader, born in solitude, where he was to meet his God. He was the child saved from the water, and now his destiny was prepared. He would become the guide who would lead his people through another greater water, the Red Sea. Not yet the time, but the day had come. And Moses, clad in the simple garments of a wanderer, carried an indomitable resolve in his heart to return and set free.